Good day everyone, and welcome to English for Academic and Professional Purposes class. I am teacher Juainy Aggabao from Becuran High School, Division of Pampanga. For today's lesson, we will be differentiating academic texts and non-academic texts. We'll also be talking about the different types of academic text and non-academic text, as well as the point of view of non-academic text, and of course, the factors that shape academic writing. But before we start on the lesson proper, I want you to get your notebook together with your ballpen so that you can take note of the important details or keys on the lesson. And of course, don't forget to get your modules or the modified modules that I gave you so that you can follow across the discussion. And finally, find a comfortable place so that you can learn better. So, are you ready? Let's go! So academic text is more on content associated with formal learning or gaining such knowledge, and these are simply characterized as type of texts that are written by professionals. Let's take for example, medical field, education field, engineering or architecture field, and so on and so forth. Similarly, since it is written by most professionals in a particular field, more often than not, academic texts contain words and terminologies that are very specific to that particular field. So let's take for example, if it's a doctor writing about certain things in the field of medicine, then therefore he or she might be using terms that are very specific to that particular field alone. And people like us who are not familiar with the field of medicine, then we can consider these words as jargons. Let's proceed. Now, academic texts also contain list of sources and references. So what do we mean by that? Every information that is presented in a particular academic text, it has to be backed up and supported by other references. It has to be validated by other references. It has to be validated by other sources, because more often than not, when forming an academic text, you should always refer to other sources as well. Next, since academic text uses formal language, it could be very challenging, especially for those beginning readers or what we call the novice readers. Why? Because academic texts uses jargons, and these terminologies might be unfamiliar to them, and formal language often entail us to use words that are not commonly used during conversations or even when reading non-academic text in nature. Finally, academic text is also characterized as something that is argumentative in nature. So when we say argument, there are points of view that are being discussed on that particular paper, or there are certain points that are to be discussed. And then of course, always remember that it has to be objective as well. Not subjective, but rather objective, meaning there has to be no bias. There has to be no bias at all. All the informations that you are presenting to your audience or readers does not need to be biased or leaning towards a particular belief or a particular point of view. Always remember, it has to always present all sides of the story so that you can come up with a better result of your academic paper. So here are some examples of academic texts. It includes school books and textbooks. So these are the ones that you typically use in school or in the university. Journal articles are also considered to be academic texts, and other research proposals and papers as well. Some other newspapers and magazine articles are considered to be academic texts, particularly if these are broadsheets, okay? Some newspapers might contain pieces of articles that are academic in nature, and some magazines as well, like National Geographic Science magazines, and so on and so forth. Theses and dissertations are also considered to be pieces of academic texts. And of course, case studies and reports are examples of academic text, because these texts might contain data and informations that are based from personal or experimental activities. And there are also different types of academic texts. So the first one is the descriptive academic text. When we say descriptive, basically it just provides description. So how do we do that in terms of writing an academic text? These are the types of academic texts that provide facts and information. So it delivers facts and information to support the concept, to support the idea in a way describing that particular concept or describing that particular idea as well. So the keywords, particularly informing objectives in writing academic texts, include identify, report, record, summarize, and define. So when you see this as an objective, or when you think of these things, okay, as your objective, your purpose primarily of writing that particular academic text, definitely this is the type of text that you will be focusing, the descriptive text. The next one is analytical. In an analytical academic text, information and facts are organized. Now, how do we organize these pieces of information? You group them into categories, themes, different parts. You group them into different types, and once you have identified their relationships or their connections, and then that's the time that you can organize them into different categories, group, themes, parts, and types. Again, some keywords that you can use is or are analyze, compare. You can compare and contrast, relate, and examine. The third type of academic text is persuasive. So when we say persuasive, it simply includes arguments, recommendations, interpretations, or even an evaluation of the work of another. Now, why do we do that? Because we want our readers to believe in whatever we are saying. Now, that's why it's called persuasive. You are trying to present certain things that would affect or at least influence the way that our readers think, or the way that your readers will consider this particular concept or particular idea. Now, when you write this, unlike the other types of academic text, in persuasive academic text, you can also add your own point of view. Aside from the point of view of others, you can also try to add your own point of view, but still in an academic manner, in a scientific and objective manner. Now, how do we do this? Even if you try to add your own point of view, your own interpretation needs to be supported by pieces of evidences. It doesn't have to be, or it couldn't be just is or as is, okay? Just because you believe in it, that's why it's supposed to be your belief, your own opinion. It has to be also supported by evidences. Now you have to ask yourself, why did I even about it like this in the first place? Okay? Why did I even consider it like this in the first place? Or why do I even believe that this is the case? So you have to always support your own beliefs, your own opinions, and a persuasive academic text. Some of the keywords include argue, evaluate, discuss, and take a position. Lastly, we have critical academic text. So when we say critical academic text, it simply requires you as a reader and as a writer, you have to consider at least 2 points of view, meaning a point of view of another and of course your own point of view. Now, in other words, it could be argumentative in nature, alright? So example, keywords that may be included when you're writing in a critical academic text include critic, debate, disagree, and of course, evaluate. Let us now move on to describing non-academic text. Non-academic text is usually written for the mass public. Therefore, it is written for the general population. even if you didn't go to school, even if you're not a professional or a working professional, it is much easier to understand non-academic text unlike academic text. Actually, non-academic texts can be published instantly or quickly, and they can be written by anyone using their first language, Filipino, English, or any other languages. And the reason for this is because it often does not involve or require research or even mentioning our sources. So you don't always have to refer anything else when you are writing non-academic text. But remember, do not practice plagiarism. Why? Because in plagiarism or in writing non-academic texts, sometimes there is a need to give credits or to give credits to the informations that we have used to our non-academic text to make it more impactful to our audience. And non-academic text, of course, is not as tedious as academic text or writing academic text because it doesn't involve that's it. It doesn't involve a lot of research, or it doesn't involve a lot of background research. As I've mentioned earlier, academic text uses formal language. And it's quite the opposite of non-academic text because it uses slang, informal, or it is more of conversational words. Even typical person can understand your piece of work. So let's have a brief summary of differentiating non-academic and academic text. Always remember that in academic text, it always uses jargons such as words or terminologies that are very specific or particular to that discipline. While on the other hand, non-academic texts may contain or involve slang words that are typically or usually used by people during conversation. Now, don't get confused with this one because in some non-academic texts, the author may also be unknown. So it doesn't necessarily have to contain a name of the author, or it doesn't have necessarily require a name of an author. And non-academic texts deliver a simple and basic information, like what I have mentioned earlier, something that could easily be read and easily understood by any kind of reader. Therefore, non-academic texts, unlike academic texts, they are more personal in nature, meaning anyone who wants to write this type of texts can actually share or express their own ideas, feelings or emotion, even their own viewpoint or opinion towards a particular topic. And of course, non-academic texts are very subjective. Unlike academic texts, they must be objective. And you could just present your own viewpoint without the need to prove why you even think of it that way, right? So you can present your own opinion without even justifying that particular opinion in the first place. So it has bias, it may present bias. So in non-academic texts, you can present bias. You can stand for your own opinion. Here are some examples of non-academic texts. It includes blog posts, which is very common recently, alright? Fiction books are also considered to be non-academic texts. Similarly, some letters, personal letters, could be considered as non-academic text, as well as personal journals and diaries. And others are newspapers, magazines, and blog articles or social media posts are also non-academic text. Now here's a summary of academic text and non-academic text based from its structure, purpose, and tone. Now, let's move forward to different factors that shape academic writing. What do we mean by this? Simply, these are some of the things that you really have to consider whenever you are writing a piece of academic text. These are some of the things that you really have to think about carefully, plan about carefully when you are producing academic text. So these factors include number 1, the audience. Second is the purpose, and the third one is the organization, and followed by the style, of course the flow, and your presentation. Now let's go first to audience. Audience is basically whom you're writing for. So meaning, who are going to be reading this particular text. So when you're writing an academic text, more often than not, these are professionals. Your audience are professionals. But what if these are doctors, these are teachers? So it is important to focus on the things that you know they are not familiar with yet. Because class, it will be a waste of time if you write and share information if you know they already know about this particular topic. Bottom line, it will be better to use new data. Now let's go to purpose. Again, purpose is very important because purpose is basically your objective why you're even writing this piece of academic text in the first place. Is it to entertain, educate, or to provide informations and so on and so forth? And is it to differentiate things or to give clarification? So it's really important that you know your purpose because it will give direction on how to write this kind of academic text. Okay, when you know your objective, when you know your end goal, it will be very easy for you to plan out how to get to that particular end goal. Like when you don't know what's going to happen at the end or what's expected to happen at the end, then you will not be able to know how to get there. All right, so it's very important that you also know your purpose of writing this particular piece of academic text in the first place. All right? Next, let's go to organization. Organization simply refers to how you will be arranging your ideas. If you could still remember the concepts that were discussed in your reading and writing class, particularly lessons on the text structure and text patterns or outlining, then organization would be very easy for you. You just need to determine your purpose, guided by your objective, guided by your end goal. Also, you just need to determine how are you going to be organizing it. If your end goal is to provide information, for example, a descriptive or a description of that particular concept, then what type of text structure, what type of text pattern are you going to be using? Of course, it is also descriptive. So you need to provide descriptions by providing facts and of course pieces of information. So it is very important to remember that your purpose and the organization of your ideas should always go hand in hand. Next, of course, you also need to consider the style that you are going to be using in writing this particular text. So how are you going to do that? You just need to answer the question, what technique or what techniques you are going to be using or whenever you write this particular text. Okay, now, how do we do that? Remember that academic texts entail a particular level of formality, right? So what level of formality will you be using? And would it be enough for your audience? Would it be appropriate for your audience when they see it or when they get to read it? So you have to consider that one as well. Similarly, your style, like what I have mentioned earlier, is guided by who is going to be your audience. Take for example, you also need to consider the text pattern in the text structure. Is it enough to stick with just one text structure, or you can do a combination of one or a combination of two or more? Okay, so still, of course, it would really depend on who will be reading your texts. So here's another factor to consider is, of course, the flow. Meaning you just have to ask yourself the question, how well will you be expressing your ideas on this text? These ideas, similarly just like an organization, once you have figured out the way that to organize your thoughts, your information, your facts, okay, the way that you have already plotted out those things or outline those things, then definitely flow will come after. Always remember that when you're writing academic text, rather, your main goal is always to inform. So aside from your other goals, your main goal should be to provide information to your readers. Now, in order for you to do that, of course, you need to make sure about your ideas, so the information rather that you will be presenting will flow smoothly, meaning there is a good transition from one idea or one concept going to another until you reach the end. Finally, last but not the least, of course, your presentation. So, is your output or academic text ready for publication? Or is it ready to be consumed by your readers or audience? Finally, alright, so after accomplishing your text, of course, first and foremost, you have to write a draft of it. Okay, so then it will go through sets of revisions. It is not just one revision, rather it will go through a lot of revisions. That's why you have to remember that writing academic texts are not very easy to complete or to accomplish. It will really take a lot of time because it might go through different levels of revisions. Alright, so once the revisions are already done, okay, once the layout is finalized, then you may consider your output to be ready for publication or publishing, and or ready to be consumed, to be read by your intended audience. And that's all for today. And I hope you have learned something new. If you have questions, just feel free to comment anything below. Again, I am Sir Juainy Aggabao from Becuran High School, Division of Pampanga. Thank you and God bless.